So we return to chapter 5, and Lily has returned to Brackenbridge with Madame Verdigris. Let's find out what happens now. Yes, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am. I didn't realise I'd run out of clicks before you arrived, but you took so long. Malheureusement, the Zeppelin was delayed, Madame said. Foul weather, storm clouds on the line. Shame. Mrs. Rust ruffled Lily's hair with a soft leathery hand. I've made up the young lady's room, like you asked, though I could have done with a little help. The mechanical cook gave the housekeeper a dark stare, but Madame didn't notice because she turned to Lily. Mrs. Rust will help you settle in, she said. Mais, quietly. You'll find things run differently round here with me at the helm. I'll accept none of the tearaway behaviour your father saw fit to tolerate, especially not in a jeune fille haranguée. Madame tipped her head back to stare down her nose at Lily. I shall want to see you in the drawing room, straight after breakfast, when we shall discuss matters further. Lily nodded meekly. She was too wrung out by the emotion of the day to find a suitable response. Bon, the housekeeper said. Then I shall retire to bed. It has been a long trip. She took the oil lamp from the hall table and swept off up the stairs, leaving Lily and Mrs. Rust alone in the glow of a single candle. Mrs. Rust picked it up and ushered Lily upstairs too, as they reached the first floor landing. Lily heard Madame shut the door of the master bedroom and saw the glint of her lantern through the gap beneath it. But that's Papa's room, she cried out. Smokestacks and sprockets, Mrs. Rust whispered. Not any more. Soon as she heard he was gone this morning, Madame moved his things into the servants' box room at the back and installed herself there before she came to get you. She even had Mr. Wingnut set up your mamma's old dressing room table for her. Lily felt ill all over again. Mamma had been gone 7 years and Papa only a day, but already Madame was acting like lady of the manor. Mrs. Rust opened the door to Lily's own room. At least in here she was relieved to find everything was just as she left it. Her books still piled on their shelves, and her notes and drawings pinned to the walls in fat bunches, hiding the yellow paper. She emptied her suitcase into the wardrobe, not bothering to unfold anything, while Mrs. Rust busied herself filling the grate with kindling, her arms rattling like bicycle chains. Madame stopped me setting the fires this week while your papa's been away, she said. But now you're home, we'll soon have things running the way they're meant to. It'll make it cosy in no time, don't you worry. The old mechanical laid the last of the logs atop the kindling. Oh, and you might be needing an extra layer. It's got pretty cold here these winter nights. Good idea. Lily took a blanket from the cupboard and shook it out over the bed, filling the room with a blizzard of dust. Clockwork and... Mrs. Rust let out a foghorn sneeze. Cam wheels! Bless you, Lily said. Thank you, my tiger. The mechanical took an old scrap of sacking from her pocket and blew her nose into it. A touch of pneumatic pneumonia. Can I give you a piece of advice? Don't tell Madame anything you don't have to. This past week while your father's been on his trip, she's been through his office with a fine tooth comb. How dare she? What on earth is she looking for? Mrs. Rust threw her arms in the air. Crankshafts and carburettors, I wish I knew. Could be anything. She's a devious one, her. Got all kinds of wheels turning in her head, and she was lording it up when we heard the news this morning. Put herself in charge, naturally. Mrs. Rust held the candle to the kindling and fanned the flames with her apron. Lily sat on the bed, watching her. Widgets and windscreen wipers, the old mechanical muttered at last when the fire had caught. You mustn't mind my blather. It's only the wittering of an old fuss budget. When you come down in the morning I shall make you a nice tea cake with jam, just as you like it, and we can have a proper gossip. Thank you, Rusty. Sorry we woke you so late. I hope you sleep well. Oh, you too, my tiger Lil, you too. Mrs. Rust placed the candle by her bedside and crept out. Lily pulled the blanket over her knees and sat listening to the old mechanical's creaking joints as she walked away along the passage. Later, changing into a nightdress, Lily touched the long white scar on her chest. A cut made by a shard of windscreen glass during the accident. The mark had faded over the years, like the memory of Mamma, but she still felt its sharp throb sometimes, and now, with Papa gone too, those memories She tried so hard to forget were once again welling up inside, gnawing at her empty belly. She brushed them away and pondered Mrs. Russ's parting words. What was Madame after in Papa's things, and what could she do about it? These new thoughts were not at all pleasant, and she was too hungry and exhausted to consider them. She hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. Strange to think that afternoon she'd still been at school. She glanced at her bedside clock. 1:30. Beneath the hands, tiny ivory inlaid sheep jumped over a stile. Papa had designed it for her, and she found herself counting the creatures now, trying to ignore the whir of her mind as she closed her eyes and drifted off into an uneasy sleep, full of silvery-eyed men and skull-topped canes. Chapter 6. Robert pushed open the door to his Da's workshop and laid the broken fox down on the workbench in the centre of the room. Rows of brass tools and clock faces glinted in the gaslight, throwing twitching shadows across the walls. Robert examined the mechanical's injury. Under the sackcloth outer covering, where the top of the fox's leg joined the metallic shoulder blade, the bulbs and hexagons of the connecting bolts were all broken, and the rest of the parts had fused together in a lump. He was about to get to work when he sensed someone in the room and glanced around. His Da was standing in the doorway, arms folded across his chest, a quizzical look on his face. "What have you got there, son?" Thaddeus asked. "A mech fox." Robert stood aside so his Da could get a better view. "I found it hiding down the lane. Men chased it across the village. I think they shot it." He stopped there because he didn't know what else to say. None of it made sense. Why would anyone shoot a mechanimal? "Let's have a look." Thaddeus stepped over and examined the mechanimal. He put on his glasses and peered closely at the shattered cogs visible under the torn sackcloth fur. "I've only ever seen such workings once before," he muttered. "From these tiny, delicate parts, I'd say the master mechanist who put this creature together was Professor Hartman of Brackenbridge Manor." "You mean that secretive fellow?" Robert asked, astounded. "The one who calls himself Grantham?" "Aye, the very same," Thaddeus said. "Hartman's his real name, but I'm the only one in the village who knows that." He glanced at the fox. "Where did you say it was headed?" "East," Robert said. "Then that'll be it." Thaddeus massaged his temples. "What's this?" He'd found something, a small leather pouch under the matted fur ruff of the mechanical's neck. Thaddeus opened the pouch and pulled out a bullet-singled envelope. On the front, in faded oil, spattered letters, was written one word. Lily. "Yes, of course," he said. "It must belong to the professor's daughter." "He has a daughter," Robert said. Thaddeus nodded. "I think she's at boarding school now, and I've certainly never met her. When she's around, he likes to keep her shut away." "Why?" Thaddeus put the letter and pouch to one side on the bench. "Oh, I don't know. Overprotective, I suppose. She lost her mother when she was quite young, before they moved to Brackenbridge, and then for a long time she was very ill. Maybe that's why he made her this pet." Robert could sympathise. He knew what it was like to grow up without a ma, although he had a feeling Thaddeus meant Lily's mother was dead, not off somewhere else, like his own. He couldn't remember when he'd first decided to stop asking about his ma, probably when Da had refused to give her a straight answer. Seemed every family had secrets of some kind, good or bad. He glanced from the fox to Lily's letter in his Da's hand. "Should we open it, do you think?" Thaddeus shook his head. "One never opens other people's mail, Robert. But perhaps we take it to her." "And we'll help the fox, won't we?" Robert said. "I'm afraid if we don't, it might wind down forever." Thaddeus thought about this. "Men were chasing it, you say. And John's airship is missing. It crashed. I wonder if this is something we should get involved with. It sounds dangerous." Robert sat down on the stool beside his Da. "It's something that needs fixing, and you always say if something needs fixing, we should try our best to fix it, no matter the cost." "You're right, of course." Thaddeus gave his son a weary look. "Such terrible things happen in the world, don't they? Violence against mechs and humans, and sometimes it feels easier to give in or just not to get involved. But I suppose without those devils, there'd be no chance for us to do good. And doing good is what matters. though it can sometimes be frightening. Thaddeus paused and tapped the workbench thoughtfully with a screwdriver. No one conquers fear easily, Robert. It takes a brave heart to win great battles. He peered at the fox. Now we can repair this, do you think? Or has it ticked its last tuck? Let's have a look. He opened a drawer in the workbench and took out a roll of leather, which he unfurled to reveal neat lines of tools, rows of watchmakers' screwdrivers, needles and tweezers, each in their own individual leather pocket. From another drawer, he produced various glass jars of tiny screws and cogs, which he arranged in a row behind the leather scroll of tools. At last, he took his magnifying glasses from a hook on the wall and put them on, blinking his big blue eyes. With a pair of tweezers, he opened the bullet hole in the mechanimal's leg, prizing apart the oil-encrusted sackcloth fur to examine its internal workings. Robert stood on tiptoes and peered over his dark shoulder, trying to get a glimpse at the damage. Behind the shoulder blade, the bullet had smashed and distorted the animal's tight-knit internal clockwork. It had cut a path through splintered cams and springs before embedding itself deep in a dented metal plate. This is a serious repair job, Thaddeus said. But you can fix it, Robert asked. The clockmaker nodded. Oh, yes. It will take time, though, and I'll need your help. Go and get all the jars containing the copper cams and the watch springs. If there aren't enough, bring a few of the old clocks over there. We can filch parts from them. Right you are. Robert set off to collect the bits and pieces they would need from around the workshop, while Thaddeus picked up his screwdrivers and set to work on the mech fox. It took them many hours to repair the damage the bullet had done to the mechanimal's shoulder. Robert helped remove the mangled cogs and logged them in the workbook, and when Thaddeus called for replacement parts, if they weren't in the selections he'd already brought, Robert would run and get them from various jars and tins stacked on the shelves in the storeroom. Sometimes the parts were more difficult to come by, and he had to search through the bench drawers for them. Once, when they needed a certain click wheel, Thaddeus told him to go and check in the backs of all the timepieces in the shop itself, and not to return until he found one. But at other times, Robert sat in the room, helping his dad. Working together like this was one of the few opportunities he got to talk to him. Robert always enjoyed it, despite his dread of doing something clumsy, because he knew at moments like these he could ask his dad difficult things. Isn't it funny, he mused, how a mech cannot harm a human, and yet a human can harm a mech? How can that be? Thaddeus looked at him, his brows furrowed and his big eyes blinked behind their magnifying lens as he considered the question. It's the first rule of mechanics, Robert. A mech cannot kill a human or seriously harm them. How do they know that? It's part of their design, built into their values and their circuits. And yet we can kill them. Stop them from being. Robert carefully replaced a part inside the fox's leg. What happens to a mechanical that doesn't tick anymore anyway? I suppose they die, Thaddeus said, if they can do such a thing. Or they disappear, Robert said. He held an oily cog in his hands, turning it over and over. The sharp teeth around its edge pricked at his fingers. But what happens to them after that? Do you think they go to heaven? Do you think they have mechanical souls? Thaddeus thought about this as he replaced a spring around the fox's scapula. I don't know. Common opinion is they don't. I never told you this before. Perhaps I should have mentioned it earlier. But for a while, 7 years ago, when he first moved here, I used to go to Brackenbridge Manor to wind the clocks for Professor Hartman. When he learned that I repaired timepieces as well, he'd occasionally ask for help fixing one of his mechs, though I never saw this one. Robert's eyes widened. He hadn't realised his dad had worked on proper mechs before. It was yet another thing that had been kept from him. All of John's mechs were so delicately made, Thaddeus continued, and when they were working, something about them seemed different, more alive. How so? They're not like the regular models. They've got quirks, can think for themselves. If that doesn't make them living things, I don't know what does. But why aren't there more of those ones about? Robert persisted, pressing the teeth of the cog against his palm. Perhaps John made them specially. Certainly, the mass-produced mechs never have that amount of personality. It takes skill to make such things. I think he only let me help them with his repairs because he saw a kindred spirit. That and the fact he didn't like sending his mechs away to be fixed. Said it had destroyed their personalities. Thaddeus took a deep breath and repairing the fox's leg and packed his pipe with fresh tobacco from a pouch in his pocket. Then he lit it and took a few long puffs. What are they like then, his other mechanicals? Robert asked. He couldn't imagine having such a life of privilege, to have so many mech servants around you, even to have a mechanical pet like the fox. Thaddeus blew out a ring of smoke. One of the mechs up at Brackenbridge, Mrs. Rust, the cook, used to sing as she worked. Songs she'd made up. And I suppose one might say, if she created such a wonderful thing, then she possessed a soul. But still, when she broke down and John and I repaired her insides, I could never see where her spark of life came from. The thing is, Robert said, if you opened up a human, I don't expect you find evidence of a soul either. Or what's unique about them come to that? Thaddeus shrugged. I don't know enough about these things to tell you, but one thing I do know is this. Feelings and intuition, love and compassion, those are the things that make a soul, not blood and bones or machine parts. He ruffled his son's hair with a calloused hand. The soul's a matter of the heart, Robert, and the heart's a mystery. Even the greatest scientists don't understand. Robert nodded, but he wasn't sure he understood either. He watched Thaddeus put his pipe to one side and returned to his screwdrivers, digging away at the cogs inside the mechanical fox. It truly was a remarkable device. Robert remembered it moving down the street, just like it had a fox's soul. Perhaps his Dar was right. The truth was there was less difference between humans and mechanicals than anyone would like to admit. At 3 a.m, Thaddeus finally laid down his tools and announced they were done. Taking a needle and thread, he stitched the fox's loose sack fur back together until the machinery in the leg was entirely hidden. Robert piled felt blankets onto the workbench, and they laid the mechanical down on its side among them. After all this, Thaddeus took the unique winder from where it hung about the fox's neck, placed it in the keyhole, and made 10 sharp turns. Then they stepped back and waited to see if it would wake. The fox shuddered, and Robert held his breath. He could hear the springs and cogs turning, ticking inside it, but the mechanical didn't move or open its eyes. Perhaps, Thaddeus said, the new parts need time to bed in. And perhaps we can try winding it again tomorrow, Robert added. Thaddeus put a hand on his shoulder. After your chores, please. It will still be here then. If it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. We've done as much as we can for tonight, and sometimes that's all one can do. They took up the lamp and left the room, both so tired that they forgot about the letter left under the pile of tools on the workbench.